Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. My name is Crown and today we are going to have some more stories that I hope that you will enjoy. But before we start, it would be so much appreciated if you would subscribe to the channel, like the video if you enjoyed it, and maybe leave a comment down below. These simple clicks would mean a lot to the future of this channel and really reward the effort that I put in every day. And now, without further ado, let's go! First story. Sergeant wants me to pull armed guard duty with a broken arm. Let's do it. So backstory. Around the 2013 timeframe, I was stationed at a recently shut down US Army garrison in South Korea. I was attached to a unit known as the United Nations Command Honor Guard. This was a multinational honor guard with representative military branches from a few different countries, all living together. We did ceremonies for all big wigs that came to the country, as well as armed security for very sensitive buildings on the installation. Those of us in the US Army, along with our South Korea counterparts, were solely responsible for the guard work. I will refrain from using certain buildings by name, as they were highly sensitive buildings requiring a lot of security. They are more like underground bunkers for doomsday situations, with windows and doors painted on to fool any satellites. This is where my story begins. I had broken my hand and arm shortly after arriving in Korea through fault of my own. I was in a hard cast and was deemed unable to perform armed guard or ceremonies until I healed. So I primarily ran radio checks and did patrolling rounds to catch anyone sleeping on duty. On this particular day, I was supposed to be off duty, but I was awoken by the sergeant of the guard who was also my squad leader. We will call him Sergeant K. He had an M9 with 2 mags and a pistol built in hand. Before I can muster the words to explain him off, I'm informed that there is someone special in town and we must up the guard's count. I try to explain there is no way in hell I can safely pull armed guard duty with a broken shooting hand and arm. And at this point I was technically considered unqualified for the M9 since I hadn't been to the shooting range for it in months. He tells me just take it and go by the book. Roger that, Sergeant. I was put into a building that has a foot-thick vault door made of steel that leads to a protected guard booth. There is another door of equal size that leads to stairs that go to an underground tunnel that leads to a network of conference rooms as well as a large command hub. I've been on duty for around 2 hours at this station, reading over the standard operation procedure for this particular hub. I noticed that book has a typo that clearly states, "Only visitors that possess X color badge with X level security clearance are permitted access to this facility," when in reality, it should have stated that only X at minimum level security clearance may access and all colors indicating higher security clearance are also allowed access as well. Initiate compliance. In walks this British Army general in plain clothes. I ask for a military ID to confirm who he is. He responds in good fashion. I shall certainly not have to show you who I am. I calmly stare that this is a rule, and as I'm not accustomed to him, I cannot take his word. He finally shows me his access badge, which unfortunately for him is the highest level he's able to get. I show him the book and clearly point that he cannot access this facility unless he only has X clearance, and no higher than that. The look on his face was almost too much to keep from laughing and breaking composure. He turns brightly red and walks out. I'm sure thinking dim-witted 10 minutes later. I have a royalty angry Sergeant First Class E7 pounding his fist on my ballistic glass window. He's screaming, "Open the door, specialist, before I skull drag you through this window." Now I've met this man before and he's typically a nice guy and helpful. but he's just found out I refused the British Army envoy access to the command meeting. This particular sergeant is a paper jockey for the 4-star general of the entire Korean peninsula and the Asian theater. He has been sent by the general's order to adjust me. I asked to see the sergeant's security access before I open the door to get my skull dragged. Unfortunately for him, the book says he needs X, and he has higher than X. So, I refused. About 20 minutes later, I have the entirety of my command staff in the room, with me screaming and hollering, threatening to chapter me out of disobedience. I calmly asked to explain my actions and the circumstances. The sergeant from earlier arrives just in time for the explanation. He is still beet red and fuming to high hell. I open the book and point at it, and tell them I went by the book as ordered to by Sergeant K. And the book states that only X was allowed. And as stupid and ridiculous as it sounded, the book says anyone with a higher clearance was not authorized. The looks around this tiny room are of hysteria and defeat. The first one to laugh is this pissed off sergeant from earlier who took the book and trashed it in the burnt box and walked out. My CEO, XO, and PL spent that night typing a new SOP for all GOT station. And Sergeant K was confined to pull in 24-hour guard shifts every other day for the week as punishment for making an unqualified and physically incapable shooter pull an armed guard shift. And I was exempted from guard duty until the cast came off. Next story: California Mega Karen versus Older Texan. A crazy little incident at the World of Wolves I witnessed when visiting an aunt who lives in Texas, post-pandemic. This day I went shopping with my aunt at what we shall call the World of Wolves tour. It rhymes with that, and we walked in on what could be called the most entitled weirdest incident I have ever witnessed, with a very satisfying ending too. But I digress. On with the story. We were shopping and having a great time. I love my aunt and really enjoy her company. We were talking about nothing in particular. Her husband's latest project, the latest blanket she was making for her new grandbaby, and so on. As we shopped, we started to hear a loud voice, and it was getting louder. Loud, rude, and very condescending in tone. It stopped briefly, then a shout. "Get the heck out of the way!" No responding voice. So the shout came again, even louder. "I say get the heck out of the way!" Being curious and a bit nosy, we went in that direction. And we found a woman that was every bit of description of a Karen short. Bobbed hair, 2 sizes too small yoga pants, shirt that looked as if she was trying to relive her youth despite being what looked like over 40 and overweight. She was shouting at an older man who, in all appearances, was in no hurry and wasn't about to hurry just because she was being impatient. He turned and looked at her, not saying a single word, and he stared at her with hardened eyes and no nonsense look on his face. Then he turned back to what he was doing and ignored her. She turned to a nearby shopper and said loudly, "This is why I hate this state. Everyone is so rude and ignorant here." By this time, having heard her insulting his home state, the shopper turned and answered her, "Then go home. This is exactly why we hate people like you here. And we make sure you know you're not welcome around here." What we didn't know at the time is that she had been bragging loudly on how much better California was, and that Texas was full of nothing but pumpkins and rednecks. She got this shocked and had the "how dare you" look on her face, and actually slapped him, at which he promptly slapped her back hard enough to half spin her and nearly knock her into the closest shelves. "Shall we try that again?" he inquired mildly. "You assaulted me! I'm going to have you arrested!" She screamed at him after her brain stopped spinning in its tiny space. I wound up to slap him again. He simply raised his hand, palm exposed, and looked at her, and she actually slapped him again. This time he slapped her back hard enough that she landed on her butt with a loud oof that sounded like a beached whale trying to breathe. By this time, a manager and security had gotten there in time to see her second swing at him and his reaction. To shorten what would be a long description of events with unnecessary details, they helped her up onto her feet. She immediately started the crocodile tears and was me tale and told a heavily embellished version of what actually happened, and he simply told the truth. He said, if you doubt my word, you can always check the security cameras for what happened. In the meantime, the Karen was still crying and putting on a show and telling more and more about the incident, adding even more details that never happened and that didn't make any sense, all the while demanding the police to be called and he be arrested for assaulting her and threatening to kidnap her and other nonsense. We noticed at the time that no one around her believed her, and some were scoffing and making disapproving sounds at her. In the end, the Karen was the one being escorted out in cuffs, and she went kicking and screaming all the way and earning herself several assaults on an officer, charges for kicking the officers and spitting on them in the process, and being charged with the destruction of store property. She kicked over 2 displays and destroyed the shelf as she was dragged out. The gentleman was fine and not charged with anything. Turns out, he was and is an ex-Texas Ranger himself. Yes, they do still exist, but not like in the days of the Old West. They are actually a separate law enforcement agency from regular police or state troopers. Next story. Teacher makes false claim of me faking an injury so my mom messes with her career. I, 15 female, have had a long and elaborate history with injuries, especially breaking my arm. Starting from literally the day I was born, my health has been complicated. I have a few conditions, but none serious enough to impact my daily life as I know it. I have a very weak immune system, and it's somewhat easy to break bones. On top of that, I'm the definition of clumsy, and I'm also a huge idiot who gets herself into dangerous situations for fun. My mom, 40, has obviously known me from birth and knows just the extent of my weird bad luck and health issues. I've broken my arm a collective 13 times over my entire life, and almost every time I got injured or sick, it seems somebody had something to say about it. I don't know why, but teachers just love to say that students that get hurt often are attention-seeking fakers. And a lot of relationships with authority figures have been harmful because of this. Every time it's the same. For some reason, a teacher doesn't believe me. They call me a liar in front of everyone. And I get bullied for a while and then I have to try and prove that I am not faking. I could boast so many stories about teachers doing this, but this is a story about the time my mom actually managed to get revenge. This all took place around 7th grade. I was 12 at the time and I had broken my wrist by climbing on top of something I wasn't supposed to, and then falling off like a dumb kid. My wrist was in a Velcro cast since I'm very allergic to the regular cast material, as I figured out through many cases of trial and error. My teacher, let's call her Mrs. Tablet, since this took place while we were learning about Egyptian tablets. She taught history and our personalities clashed a bit. I am more of a creative, adventurous, freethinker type, and she was very conservative, by the book and proper. We hadn't had any real issues before this, but we just didn't mesh well. She was absent one day and we had a sub in. I knew the sub as one of my teacher's friends and one of my bully's mom. I didn't like her, but I was still respectful in class and just tried to get my work done. She got me in trouble for doodling on my paper once or twice, but other than that, everything was fine. Or so I thought. The next day I went into class like usual. We were working on an assignment about Egypt and their tablets when Mrs. Tablet called me over to her desk. I went over thinking she'd just get on to me for drawing on the back of my homework or something, only to get bombarded with a bunch of really weird questions. The interaction went something like this.
So, do you know why I've called you up here?
No ma'am, I can't say I do.
How long have you had that cast?
About a week now? Why?
Do you really need that cast?
Yes?
Well, the substitute told me she saw you take it off.
It's a cast. I can't take it off, it would hurt.
So if I asked the class, they would say you need that cast?
Yes?
And if I called your parents right now, they would say the same thing?
Yes, they were the ones to take me to the hospital. And she did this in front of the whole class. I was eventually dismissed and people looked at me weird for the rest of the class. As I later learned, apparently the substitute had told Mrs. Tablet that I'd taken off my cast as soon as I left the class. I didn't. And then I threw it in my locker like, ha ha ha, I'm getting away with doing less work. So basically she pretended I was a bad guy in a crappy high school movie. I don't know why she said this, but it had my teacher convinced that I was a liar and a fake. I technically could remove my cast, since it was Velcro, but that would have been extremely painful and it's not like I could just walk around without it. I wasn't going to make a big deal about it at the time, but it turns out she was serious about calling my parents. But she made the mistake of calling my mom. Now me and my mother don't have a perfect relationship. She has anger issues, so we don't always get along well. But she loves me very much and doesn't let people like this mess with me if she can stop it. According to my mom, Mrs. Tablet called her all cocky and said things like,
"Apparently your daughter is wearing a cast. Did you know that?"
And
well, we all know how dramatic teenage girls can be, especially unique kids like her.
She apparently even threatened to have me suspended before my mom stopped her and tore her to shreds for talking about her child like that. I don't think I'm allowed to repeat what was said, but by the end Mrs. Tablet had to retreat with her tail tucked between her legs. She started being even more cold to me after that day. Started giving me unfair detentions for not sitting still and doodling on the side of my worksheets. Even then, outside of school, we went to the same art studio sometimes. Weird that someone who hates art so much likes to paint. And she poisoned the art director against me and got me put into a lower class. When my mom found out about this, she started the real revenge. My mom has never been a PTA mom. She honestly can't stand most of the PTA members and their kids are chosen as favorites at my school and use this power to bully others, including me and my friends. My mom is however friends with a very lovely woman on the county school board, which has more power than the PTA. She told her friend everything that had happened and supplied all the doctor's notes needed to prove I needed this cast. Her friend managed to convince the rest of the board that Mrs. Tablet was discriminating against an impaired student, given her comments about me being slower at work and just wearing the cast to slack off, along with detentions related to me not sitting still when she knew I had nervous movements and slight ADHD. At the art studio, my mother pulled me from the classes. I took it upon myself to inform the fellow kids about why, and rumors spread quickly. Soon enough, kids were getting pulled left and right and my art teacher was pulling at strings to try and get the situation under control. I actually think the studio went into temporary closure before reopening again. She was suspended for a week to go under investigation. And it turns out, she treated a lot of the unique, as she put it, students in a similar situation. She was verbally reprimanded by 2 different departments, and instead of getting her standard raise over the next 3 years, she'll only get half of that. Not only that, but she had to retake a course on how to properly treat students. And if she's ever caught crossing this line again, she will lose tenure. She'll just be getting her bonus back at the start of the next school year, and I'd just like to say that I hope she learned her lesson. Next story. Sure thing, boss. I will follow the GPS. I drive a concrete truck. We deliver ready-mix concrete throughout a fairly large area. Keep in mind, concrete has a shelf life of 90 minutes once water mixes with the cement. This is very important for spec jobs. Our company uses a routing and tracking system I will call the terrible system. If there is a good route or less than good route, it chooses the worst route of all routes possible. After working with it a short time, this was noted. During training, new drivers are told to use it for the final part of the route only. Problem is, every time one doesn't follow a route, an alert is sent to management. Early in using the terrible system, managers found a way to turn off these alerts. And then the new manager starts. After a year, he brings up in meetings drivers are not following terrible system routing. Multiple times we tell him it gives us the worst and longest routes. He doesn't listen. After 6 months, he states drivers will be written up if we continue to not follow terrible system routing. Drivers do not listen. A few days after this pronouncement, a fellow driver is written up. This is talked about. Cue malicious compliance. Next day on my second load, I have a load to a location I had before. It is 15 miles east of the pant and then 10 miles north leg. Following that route takes about 45 minutes or less. We have been going to this job site for 3 months by this time and knew the terrible system gave a much longer route. I was the first truck of 4 and noted on the radio we needed to follow the terrible system route as directed. And off I go. The route it takes me is southeast 13 miles, north on Interstate Highway 35 miles, including a chicken coop, way station for non-truck drivers. Trucks are chronically overweight for interstate, east through a large metro area for 20 miles, followed by the last leg south of about 15 miles. It takes 125 minutes for me. The terrible system gave an estimated travel of 140 minutes, so I did well. I arrive and I'm timed out. Rejected, and that cost the company $1,000 for the concrete, not to mention 20 gallons of fuel I burned. Second and third trucks are the same. Fourth truck was stopped at a chicken coop and the company had a $500 fine. The customer is angry. He calls the manager screaming, and the manager asks to talk to me. I tell him we followed the terrible system routing as directed, and he can't check that easily. Next day in the break room is a sign posted stating that drivers are to use professional discretion in choosing the best/most expeditious route to jobs. If only they would listen. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching and see you next time.